Welcome to this week's episode of On the Beat Live, the number one live UNC sports podcast on Thursday nights. We have continued to corner the market. There have been no other competitors who dare to challenge On the Beat Live on Thursday nights. I'm John Bauman. I'm here with Jeremiah, with Evan, with Adam tonight to talk UNC football spring game. We are also keeping an eye on the Diamond Heels, who are playing in Raleigh tonight. Shout out to Tommy Ashley. He's manning the game thread for that. It is currently tied 5-5 in the middle of the fifth inning. So we will monitor that as the night goes along. Keep an eye on that big game for the 11th ranked Tar Heels. But before we talk about any baseball, we have to mention that we're going to be heavy on football tonight because the spring game is on Saturday. The spring game is not televised either. So if you want to watch, you have to be in Chapel Hill. So remember that if you're making your weekend plans. There are a few different practice availabilities this week. We got to talk to the media, talk to the players. So I'm going to come to Adam first. Any quotes, moments, anything stand out to you this week, Adam, from this week's football press conferences?
I mean, so many, John. So many. Can you hear me okay? I was muted earlier while I was typing, so
Sound great.
I didn't want to be tap dancing on the keys. Oh, my guy or girl, Jean Triplehorn. Great name, by the way. The actress, right? Okay, sorry. It's hard for me to see. I went to the eye doctor today, and I got my pupil. They did a thing to my pupils, and I just feel like I still feel like I'm out in outer space. But shout out to my eye doctor, George in Burlington, huge UNC fan. We talked UNC basketball essentially the entire time. Love the guy. He told me that he had to go, that he had one more patient who probably was pissed knowing this person because we were talking so much. I wasn't one talking. I was just answering his questions. That's all I was doing. But yes, that was a very roundabout way to tell you, Johnny, that I'm popping up my Word document here. I mean, I thought there was plenty of interesting stuff the last couple weeks from UNC spring football. I know spring football sometimes doesn't get people too crazy pumped, but what I picked out was from Stick Lane. And he was talking, we were talking to him the other day over at the practice facility. And he was talking about, the new defense, sort of the new defensive approach mindset under Jeff Collins. And we've talked a lot about it. We've written about the attacking, the pressuring. We've gotten to see it. Anyway, I thought it was a great quote where he said, when a quarterback sees us, he's going to see us disguising. It's going to look like something that it's really not. It's all an illusion, basically. And that's better for us. We can make more plays and stuff like that. But I believe I actually told Stick after he said that. That was a great quote. It's all an illusion, which I thought was quite good. And we absolutely need to shout out Jeremiah, who has, I think, written some great stories on Trayvon Green, on the young wideouts. He had a very nice story on Des Evans the other day. I would encourage everyone to go over to Inside Carolina and read these things. These are good stuff. I mean, I know Evan gets all the love all the time, but we need to. I mean, Jeremiah really has written some good stuff. I would recommend these stories, for any UNC fan. But thought there was a good quote from Stick Lane the other day. Some other guys have had some good ones. I don't want to steal any from Jeremiah or Evan. We can circle back if they don't mention another one that I really like from Nate McCullum. I thought it was hilarious. But I thought that was insightful from Stick Lane, and I thought that matches up with what we've written about the parts of practice that we have been able to see, where you will see Jeff Collins will have those linebackers walking up, and you're like, oh, man, the dang linebackers are coming. And then the snap comes, they'll back out. Here come guys off the edge. Here comes Elijah Huzzy off the edge. Here comes Stick Lane up through the middle after Travis Shaw bulldozes 2 or 3 offensive linemen. I think the whole disguising part of the pressures that this defense is trying to – I think disguising is a key part of what this defense is trying to do based on what we have seen. Obviously, there's still many months before the season gets started, but I just thought that was interesting that a veteran like Stick said that it's all an illusion, and that's what it's looked like. I think if I was a quarterback and I saw all that different movement pre-snap, it would confuse the heck out of me. And they've had Max Johnson run around for his life back there a couple times, the times that we've saw them, but that was one that I picked out this week.
There's some guys who look big in pads and look big without pads on. Stick Lane, amazing young man. He does not look very big with or without pads. That was what stood out to me as I was watching that interview this week.
Let me tell you real quick. So we're over there at practice. I guess it was either Tuesday or Tuesday. And, little peek at how the sausage is made. We're taking the video, which I need great help from Jeremiah and Evan just to get the thing going because I'm terrible. But we had Travion Green, who is a legit 6'7", 6'8". And then we went from Travion Green to Stick Lane. So, I mean, Sticks, he wasn't even in the frame. We had to lower the thing. I mean, it's legitimately going for a foot difference. I mean, it's like going from 6'8" to 5'8". So that was kind of funny. Like, hold up, Stick. Yeah. We gotta fix our equipment here real quick.
And that's the beauty of football too. Every single type of player is needed. What about you, for Jeremiah, for your takeaway quote, moment, anecdote, anything that stood out to you this week?
Yeah, no, that was funny. That wasn't the one I was going to use, but I was thinking about it. It's like we're talking to Trey Green. He's like 6'8". You got to think when we go talk to like Armando post game in basketball, 6'10", and then Harrison Ingram's like 6'7". So the dude's like in the mix of the tallest guys that we've really been able to talk to. So I thought that was funny. My quote actually is going to be from someone who's, I guess, 6'5", 6'6", and Des Evans. So I guess we're kind of, keeping the theme going with that a little bit. But we were talking to him. We actually talked to him on Saturday. So we had a couple of player availabilities. We had Saturday in the lobby of the football center. Then we had Tuesday directly after their practice. And so we were actually like in the practice facility. So Saturday we were in the football center. And so we talked to Des Evans, a guy who obviously has been around for a minute now. And that's going to be relevant in a second. But, we were kind of talking to him about, kind of his journey a little bit. And so he had the quote that said, you really can't be mad at the journey. You have to be prepared and ready for it. I'm happy now. I treat practices like recess. So I thought that was an interesting little quote from him. The reason I picked that one also is because it's like, he's probably one guy that benefits from, I imagine probably a lot of people do benefit from the COVID year, like as an individual player, but he kind of benefits from it in the sense that like his ride has been, somewhat unconventional. Like, obviously you can say that like, probably hasn't gotten to the level that a lot of people, would have expected him to get to. And even in being here, 4 years, in his fourth year last year, like I guess the expectations coming in was for him to kind of, really take that jump. I know he got hurt the third year. Last year, I thought he was, more productive than he had been. So, I mean, it's kind of like, now or never. We were asking him a little bit about his draft stock. He said, obviously the goal is first round. I'm sure, obviously everybody's, goal would be to get to the first round and things like that. But we were kind of talking about it, after like the other day, actually, me, Evan, and Adam were talking about it the other day. It's like, it's really just a matter of him. Like he needs more, on-field production and, more good film, because like, if you look at the dude, like if you go back and watch that video, that dude looks like he could play for any team right now. Like he looks the part for real. So, but he's a guy also that obviously as a veteran, you kind of expect him, you can tell he has a certain knowledge of the game. And really when we're talking to him as well, you could tell like he knows what he wants and like how he wants to play defense. Like it seems like just hearing him talk, Ted Monachino as the defensive line coach, and then Jeff Collins as the defensive coordinator, like you can tell he vibes with those guys. Like you can tell there's something about those guys that he just really agrees with, and he clearly has a certain level of excitement going into the year. I think he's relevant as well because Mack Brown was saying giving him some good reviews as far as the spring as well. So he'll certainly be a player to watch. Obviously, the story of his career is pretty known, I guess, at this point. But I mean, it'd be interesting just to see how he does in this rush position, because Jeff Collins wants to play him, Kamen Rucker, and Bo Atkinson all at the same time. So we'll see how, what kind of disruption that creates. But, for him going into, obviously his 5th year at North Carolina, I think he's certainly somebody to, kind of keep an eye on and really see how he finishes out this journey.
Jeremiah, you heard it here first. He's calling for 10 plus sacks for Des Evans. That's his prediction early on. No, just kidding. Evan, how about for you when you think about this week's media availabilities, quote, moment, or anecdote for you?
Yeah, we had a lot of good stuff this past week, and kind of piggybacking off Adam, I really like the story Jeremiah wrote on Trey Green. And if anyone hasn't listened to that interview yet, really, really just open, candid conversation about just Trey Green's journey to where he is now, and talking about, guys that looked apart. Trey Green is a monster. I mean, it's funny Jeremiah mentioned the basketball guys, because yes, and Armando Bacot is taller than Trey Green, but Trey Green is over 100 pounds heavier than Armando, and at a guy that's 6'7", 6'8". He said he's in about the low to mid 350s right now. And just, he's a guy that, when you hear that number 350, 360, you wonder and you worry if they're carrying a lot of weight in their gut that's unnecessary. There's nothing of that with Trey Green. I mean, he is just filled throughout, top to bottom, looks really, really good. And he talked about how he had, overcome being 410 pounds during COVID in high school, and how he kind of had to just adjust his overall schedule and health and fitness. And it's just a really, really open interview. But the quote that I had actually answers Dennis Hargrove question in the chat, because I know it's been a big talking point about the spring game this year not being televised on TV. And I'm just going to provide what Mack said. I have my own personal opinions. They do not matter. I'm not going to share my own opinions, but I'm going to show.
No, you share your opinion. I'm being serious.
I will
set up what Mack said and then tell us what you think, for real.
So
go back on now.
This was this is when we were talking to Mack. What was this? 2 days ago now, or maybe yesterday? No, days all come together. But the topic of it, the spring game not being televised came up. And for context, last Saturday, UNC opted to have its practice aired, like an all-access practice, where they showed some of the practice. They had a bunch of interviews with, players you would expect, Kamon Rucker, J.J. Jones, to name a few. And what Max said is we felt like we can highlight our players, especially in an NIL world right now, when you have a Kamon Rucker and interviewing on TV, and you can have J.J. Jones. You can really celebrate your program easier in some ways if you have a highlight at an all-access practice rather than just a game. We just felt like this year everybody else was doing spring games. We got some new things at quarterback we're doing. We got some new things on defense we're obviously doing. So it wasn't best to just put all that out there. And yeah, I think it's a very interesting decision. I mean, I don't know has there ever been a time when the spring game hasn't been televised? I can't remember.
Not since he came back, no.
Not since he's come back. I think the whole idea of you don't want to put too much out there is interesting, because it is still open to the public. I mean, I'm not saying Minnesota's going to fly a guy down here on Saturday, but that's possible if they wanted to. I think this also isn't the first time that UNC's had a quarterback battle in a spring game. And I don't really think that probably swayed into why they didn't want to put this on film. So yeah, I don't really know what the real reason is. I am surprised that it's not being aired, just for the purpose of, I think it's good for people to have the opportunity to get a glimpse about, what some of these guys may look like. I mean, Jeremiah's written about it, but some of these young wide receivers look really good, and you might not see them when the season starts, and you're only going to be able to see them during the spring game. And if you don't live within driving distance, or if you're not in state, you're not going to be able to see many highlights from that, unless, maybe there's, Jalen might get something on the sideline or something like that. So I thought it was a very interesting decision. I don't think it's telling to Mack thinks this team is going to be terrible and he doesn't want to show that on film. I don't think you can really gauge what a team is going to look like, right now in the fall. But I definitely thought it's a very interesting decision, and I'm definitely not surprised it's a big talking point right now.
I am glad we talked about this because I wanted to bring this up at some point during the show, and I want Adam's take on this next. So I'm coming to you next, Adam. I have a couple of thoughts. Number one, I think it's important to remember that the spring game on ACC Network probably does not draw a massive television audience. We're talking about a pretty small and niche thing. But this is an opportunity to broadcast and showcase your football program, highlight some of the recruiting wins that you've had over the past few seasons. And this competitive advantage angle, it's really just a competitive advantage for one game against Minnesota. Now, if you want to say, every team downloads the spring game and they spend all off season game planning off of that, okay, fine. It is what it is. I think Jeff Collins even mentioned that he was going to go more vanilla with some of his calls when he knew ACC Network was going to be there. So you can also just do that. You can just showcase your vanilla defense. It's not necessarily rocket science. So I am of the opinion, I'm not afraid to share my opinion on this one. I'm disappointed that UNC is not televising its spring game. I think it's a missed opportunity for the program to get people excited about UNC football. That is my opinion. Adam, what do you think?
There's several different things that work here, and it's kind of fascinating because we're talking about Mack Brown here. We're talking about the great communicator who spent 5 years at ESPN, who, if you're around him like we get to be, and God bless him, he's getting older, so the text on his screen of his phone is a little bigger. You will see Kevin DeGandhi texting him. You will see Booger McFarland texting him. He has both names, Kevin DeGandhi, Booger McFarland. I don't know. Football coaches are paranoid. I hope I'm not going to get in trouble here because people on the staff watch the show, and sometimes my phone lights up a little bit with some of the stuff that we say, and we don't need to be pissing them off in April. But yeah, I mean, I don't see why you wouldn't do it. But as Evan laid out there, and it's interesting. What I was going to mention was it sort of ties into this whole thing Mack was talking about the other day, which he said several times, that he feels like this team is underrated, that he feels like this team reminds him of the team from 2 years ago, 2022, when they weren't sure who the quarterback was. Oh, by the way, it became this guy who's really good named Drake May. And he's, people weren't talking about us, Mack has said. Our name wasn't out there. We might not have been in these preseason top 25s and stuff. So, I don't know how that lines up with the whole, we're not going to do the spring game. We're just going to have them come out to a practice. And, oh, by the way, we ain't going to show them anything. It's still the Chip Lindsey offense. I thought it was an easy decision last year to have the spring game on TV because you had Drake May and you got this guy named Tez Walker who was wowing everybody in the spring. And, you had a really experienced defense for the most part. But what I go back to is football coaches more than any other are paranoid. I mean, this is like war to them. And I thought it was funny that Evan said, I was picturing PJ Fleck hopping a flight to RDU, not wearing Minnesota Golden Gophers colors and somehow sneaking into Keenan, and charting all the plays. I mean, I don't know. I personally think it's a disappointing thing and that you should do that. But this is what they've chosen to do. And I'm not sure the reasoning lines up, but this is what they've chosen to do. So they're not going to televise it, but Mack's going to tell you now and the next couple months until we kick off that this team's a little underrated. This team, he likes the confidence of this team. He likes the chemistry of this team. And that's where we are. Those are my 2 cents.
I think it is very interesting that after we had a Connor Stallion situation last season, there could be a potential for a Minnesota Connor Stallions on Saturday. So we need people like Sean Crowley scanning the crowd as they're there. The super fans will be on the lookout for any Minnesota staffers wearing sunglasses and a video camera. I will be there on Saturday filming the game along with Jalen, but we will be filming highlight reels for the Inside Carolina YouTube page because, again, people might want to see the highlights from the game. So we will have them for you all on our YouTube channel after the game. I'm going to come.
Just sorry to step on your toes, John. We have the UNC NC State baseball game on here in our house tonight. They're previewing the spring game stuff. Like from now until April 20th, we're gonna have spring game stuff. I had a question from one of my housemates. Why would they? Why do they do so much spring football stuff on ACC Network? And I was like, this is why they have ACC Network. This is the crap you should have on ACC Network. You should have all this stuff on ACC Network. They created a whole freaking network. You know what I mean? You think the Big Ten Network and the SEC Network doesn't have everybody's spring football stuff on there? They absolutely do. I almost cussed there for a second. I mean, this is why you have ACC Network. So if you want to see the BC spring game, you can. It's the entertainment aspect of it. I'm sorry for interrupting. Continue.
No, that's great. In fairness, I think, I'm not sure, don't quote me on this, but I believe at the end of the Larry Fedora years, they had not a spring game televised, but sort of a structured practice. And then obviously in COVID, the spring game was canceled. So it's not completely without precedent, but it's the decision that Mack Brown has made. So that's the situation. Perhaps they just want to get people into the stadium in Chapel Hill. So if that's the case, I think the weather looks great for Saturday. You should head out to the stadium if you want to see the game. We're going to hit some listener questions here. This one is coming to you, Jeremiah. I switched up the layout a little bit so it would adjust there so no one's face is covered by the questions. This one is from Jonathan Grant. Shout out to Jonathan. You gave us a few good questions here in the chat. This is for Jeremiah. Is this Mack's best defense? That's not necessarily a super high bar, but from what you can tell so far in the personnel that UNC has, is this UNC's best defense under Mack Brown?
First of all, shout out to Jonathan Grant, man. He came out swinging in the chat. He was like the first one in there, like, you know what I mean? I'm going to assume this is just second iteration Mack.
Yes. Take Mack 1.0 out of it.
Okay, yeah. Because, yeah, I'm gonna say before I answer it. I just want to kind of cycle through a little bit, like for myself and just for context, whatever. The first 2 years, I feel like you almost gotta with all due respect, kind of throw those out. You know what I mean? And then even in the middle, some of those defenses were giving up 30 plus. I think one of them gave up 35 plus. So certainly struggled. This is the advantage this year's defense has. Last year showed that they have several kind of playmakers on that side of the ball. So Kamen Rucker's emergence, Elijah Huzzy's arrival, you know what I mean? Again, like we mentioned, Des Evans, was better last year, probably still has another way to go. Losing Cedric, I think that hurts a lot. Losing Cedric Gray hurts a lot. But you still have Power Echols. What we're hearing about the secondary and even in seeing some of those guys play, Huzzy being back at corner, I think is going to make a big difference because if he's guarding guys one-on-one, more consistently, getting a true number one wide receiver on the other side of him, because Marcus Allen did a good job, I thought, in that spot last year. But the second corner spot was a little up and down because you had a young Tayon Holloway in there, and then when Chapman got healthy, you put him in there as well. So you have Marcus Allen, who already has shown what he can do, and he's long and rangy. He's bigger than Huzzy. And then you have Huzzy, who has the ball skills that he has. That's going to make a big difference. I do think they'll have to figure out star, and they're going to have some consistent guys at safety. Boykins has been back, kind of working at safety, but I think he's still really working his way back from that knee injury. But looking at it overall, one advantage I will give this defense as well, and why I would probably lean yes. And yes doesn't mean that they're going to hold teams to 13 points a game. It just means is this the best version? Is this the best of the six defenses he's had? I would think it is, because I think what Jeff Collins is going to do, schematically is probably like more efficient. Like if you actually can pull off a lineup or a package that has like those three, edge rushers plus the secondary that you already have, like, in theory, to me, that would be way more disruptive than, some of the stuff that they've been doing in the past. Like if you really have all your key playmakers on defense in at the same time, that could be scary. I really think the main thing with this defense, I know some people looked at like the depth up front. I mean, I just kind of wonder how Amari Campbell's going to do in the Cedric Gray role. Not because I don't think Amari Campbell can play, because he can. It's just like Cedric Gray was a like all ACC dude. Like he's going to go to the NFL like in a week. So it's like that's big shoes to fill. So I think the linebacker position is, a big one to look at. But if I had to call it, yes, I would say it's probably, the best defense. We'll see how productive they end up being. But I would think that with the personnel that they have, the playmakers that they have, and also what I think they're going to try to do schematically, I would think it's the best defense.
Yeah, I think kind of like how Jeremiah was saying, I think this defense has the potential to have a lot of playmakers at a lot of different spots. The Huzzy move back, I think, is going to be huge. Obviously, you've got Kamon. And I see a lot of people in the chat wondering about the interior defensive line. And I think that is going to be, because you always hear it, it starts with the D-line. If the D-line's not good, then it doesn't matter how good your secondary or linebackers are. Your defense is going to get torn apart. And I think that's a spot right now. They definitely want to have one more guy step up. I would also argue that the interior defensive line, if we're talking about if this is going to be the best defense that Mack has had since he's been back, I can't really think of many interior defensive linemen that have been big playmakers under Mack 2.0. I mean, Miles Murphy had a spurt there, I think his sophomore year, maybe. If we're just looking at last year, I mean, you had an older Miles Murphy who I thought was a little inconsistent. You had Fox in there who maybe was an average to probably below average guy on the inside. And I think this year you've got a lot of guys who are unproven that have probably higher ceilings than both of those players. I think Jahvaree Ritzie has a higher ceiling than Fox or Murphy. He just hasn't really shown consistency yet. And obviously Travis Shaw has been a huge talking point this whole spring about how the coaching staff and some of the players have really seen him take that next step. And if that really does hold true, I think that could be a huge development within that interior defensive line. So I think if you have a three-man rotation of Hester, Jahvaree Ritzie, and Travis Shaw, that's a pretty good starting point. I think you would want at least one or two more guys just for snap purposes. And obviously you don't want Travis Shaw logging 50 snaps. But, I think this defense just overall has a lot of playmakers. I mean, I think this is probably the most talented secondary and deepest secondary they've had since Mack has been back. Obviously, losing Cedric Gray, I think, is huge. I think the Amari Campbell development is going to be massive. I mean, those are huge shoes to fill, obviously, with Power sliding over, and now him getting big-time snaps is really just a second-year guy who hasn't played all too much. But I think overall, on paper, this is definitely a deeper defense than last year specifically, and one that I think has a lot more playmakers at a lot of different spots.
I'm going to take a second here to talk about our sponsors. As I'm doing that, we have 128 people live watching here tonight. Let us know in the chat where you're watching from. Myself from Chapel Hill, Adam from, where are you at? Moncure tonight, Adam? Or not
Mebane,
Moncure.
North Carolina.
Mebane, I apologize. Mebane.
I've heard that we have some at least one good-looking person watching too. I can't out divulge who that is, but yeah. Anyway, continue. Mebane.
And I apologize for mixing up the M's there. Evan in Chapel Hill, I assume, and Jeremiah coming to us from Durham. So let us know where you're watching from tonight. We're going to take a second to talk about Johnny T-shirt, the sponsor of this Inside Carolina podcast and all Inside Carolina podcasts. We appreciate them for supporting our content. So we ask that you support them. If you're in town in Chapel Hill this weekend for the spring game, head on over to Johnny T-shirt. They have a store on Franklin Street. You can pick up the latest UNC gear. You can also shop online if you decide not to make the trip back to Chapel Hill this weekend, or if you want to come later in the summer, you can check out Johnny T-shirt online this weekend and check out their store later on. They sponsor this show, so we appreciate them. And Inside Carolina subscribers get a 10% off discount. So another perk there to shop at Johnny T-shirt. Also want to give a quick shout out to Congruity HR. Their logo is usually affixed to the show. So in lieu of that tonight, I want to give them a special shout out where Tar Heel fans can get a free payroll and HR needs assessment. So check them out, and shout out to Congruity HR for sponsoring this show and all of Inside Carolina shows. We're going to take a quick second, get the national ads in. After the break, we're going to come back with more UNC football talk, preview the QB battle in the spring game, do some transfer portal talk, get some final questions in. All right, we are back. We have Sean Crowley in the Northeast, Charles Glace. Shout out to Charles. That's a new name. Haven't seen you before. In Spartanburg, South Carolina. Ansel Gamble in Mebane, NC. Adam, I think that may have been who you're referring to. So shout out to everyone who is
One of my
watching
guys,
tonight.
Garrett
Shout
Walker,
out
I think. Let me scroll up. Yep. Love it. Love it.
Shout out to Ansel. Shout out to all of Adam's guys for being here tonight. Let's talk a little bit about the QB battle, because we've touched on it briefly, but I think that's going to be the number one thing that fans are looking at when they're watching the spring game. On Saturday, you have Connor Harrell, you have Max Johnson, both quarterbacks who will be getting a lot of reps this weekend. No Tad Hudson, who has entered the transfer portal. It's hard to keep up with all this news, but Tad Hudson is not going to be playing. Actually, I shouldn't say that, because I know he's in the transfer portal. I assume that means he's not playing in the spring game, but I'll defer to the beat writers. Yeah, it sounds like it on that. But Adam, give us a little preview of what fans should expect from the quarterback battle in the spring game on Saturday. You've had the opportunity to watch both the quarterbacks a few times this spring. What are you expecting to see?
I mean, Jeremiah, Evan, and I have talked about this at length. It seems like every time we go to a practice or we go to an availability, which is very regular. Also, shout out to Evan for making it to the availabilities this week after turning 21. Happy birthday to Evan. He was there bright and early the next morning. The guy's devoted. I just don't know. I don't know where this thing is going. I personally, and I am not frickin' Ron Jaworski or some QB evaluator. I personally feel like Connor Harrell has had a better spring than Max Johnson. Now, that is based on the few times that we have seen them practice. They've had what? Going in Saturday will be their 15th spring practice. We've gotten to see them practice twice fully, and we've gotten to see snippets of other things. Now, could Max Johnson have looked amazing the times we haven't seen him? Sure. Maybe he has. But in the limited slice of what we've seen, the limited views, I just feel like Max Johnson hasn't looked that great, and Connor Harrell has looked pretty good. This is a new offense for Max Johnson. He's played at LSU and Texas A&M the last 4 years, and Connor is more familiar with it. They're missing J.J. Jones, Gavin Blackwell, and Kobe Paysor. 3 of their most experienced wideouts. You got a bunch of freshmen and sophomores running around, in addition to Nate McCollum. You do not have Bryson Nesbitt and John Copenhaver out there at tight end. Some days they haven't had Jake Johnson, Max's brother. So you've had Deems May, and Ryan Ward, I think the kid's name is, from New Jersey, as your top tight ends. I don't know. What I would love is, and I'm probably going to ask him this on Monday, is, Max said it the other day, like when we walk out of the spring game Saturday, we're placing a lot of value on what happens in that game at these different position battles. I would like to know who's ahead in the estimation of the coaches when this game is over. We will ask that question. Hopefully we get a straight answer. The thing you expect them to say is, oh, this thing's going to go up until the game week. This thing's going to go, late into camp. So I would expect something like that, but somebody has to be leading, right? I mean, it cannot be a damn dead heat. I don't think, like someone has to be ahead by a nose or ahead by a long shot. So I do think that while some years, when Sam Howell has been there, when Drake May has been there, you can go back, to Darian Durant and these guys. Some years there's not a lot of, intrigue around what's happening at the quarterback position because who's entrenched. I don't think we know who's leading the race. And, I think for that reason, I think the spring game is massive in a way because whoever plays the best Saturday is going to take that momentum into the offseason. So it would be interesting to know if what we have seen is the true embodiment of how the entire body of work of this spring has gone, or if that's just a curveball that we've happened to see Connor Harrell's 2 best days. You know what I mean? Or Max Johnson's 2 worst days. So anyway, that's my rambling thoughts on that.
We're getting a lot of questions in the chat. Predict the winner of the QB battle. Cub3 on the message board. Shout out to Cub3. He says, all right, no disclaimers, no half answers. I want everyone to call their shot now on who wins the QB battle. That's a tough question, Cub3. I think the coaching staff does not even have an idea of that. So, Jeremiah, I'm going to twist the question a little bit on you, and I think this is also a good way for you to talk about the quarterbacks too. Answering who's going to win the QB battle is probably too tough right now. But give me your breakdown of the quarterbacks thus far. And do you think that in the Minnesota game, in the first game of the season, we will see 2 quarterbacks or we will see 1? Because there could be a chance that they play both in that first game. So your take on that thus far in the QB battle.
Yeah. First of all, I really like the way Adam kind of broke all that stuff down. I think, yes, like when we've been out there, Connor's looked good. But the thing that the advantage we have with Connor, we've seen Connor before this spring. Like we've kind of seen, obviously we saw him in the bowl game, but we've kind of seen him behind the scenes when he was the backup a couple of times, and he looks a lot better. Now, when you get to see Max Johnson up close, I mean, the dude, and Mac Brown's talked about it in person, he's 6'5" and he can move. You know what I mean? Like I saw some of his Texas A&M clips as well. Like he can move around a little bit, and it's not shocking. A lot of quarterbacks these days do have that in their bag a little bit, but yeah, he is a bigger dude and he can and he's more of a run when he needs to kind of guy. The question John just asked is very interesting to me because I just kind of think about do you just have packages, even if let's say Connor is the backup, do you just have some packages in the game where you just go read option and you say, do we just hand it to, Amarian to let Connor kind of keep it? Or do we kind of, RPO it to where Connor does get, a couple passes a game? Because I know it can be difficult to play 2 quarterbacks. That's just it gets kind of funky and it sounds good in theory, oh, let's split both guys. But that's a tough thing to do to really have 2 quarterbacks. That's not a easy thing. Now, this is what I will say. Mack, what day we talked to Mack? That was Wednesday, because that was yesterday. He said Omarion is the guy on offense this year, like Drake was the guy on offense last year, which means to me this is trying to be a running football team, especially since they're still figuring the quarterback thing out. And like Adam said, a lot of their main pass catchers aren't there right now. But if Omarion is the guy and you're kind of leaning on him, that does make me wonder, okay, Connor Harrell's fat. Connor Harrell is it's kind of underselling it to say that he's fast. That dude has he got some wheels on him. That's real speed. That's real speed. And I really do think that even if you do start Max Johnson, who does have the snaps, who does have obviously the size, and even in some of those practices, he's shown he can be accurate for sure. Like he's playing with new guys, he's playing with young guys, just to kind of give the disclaimer. But I mean, I do think it's going to be tough to keep that level of speed like on the sideline. You know, like last year, okay, Drake May, who's going to be a top 2 or 3 pick, he's your guy. Like you play him every snap for sure. But like seeing just how fast Connor really is, it's like you have to at least a few plays a game like make him a threat to the defense. So to actually answer, I guess, John's question, like, do we see 2 quarterbacks week 1? Like, I personally wouldn't think so. Unless I'm just forgetting. I can't really think of a time in which Mack has done that. Like, you know, I'm not talking about like bench a guy after a certain. I'm talking about just like, you know, you get most of the plays and then I put you in 5 times. I can't remember Mack doing that. Maybe I'm wrong on that, but I would think you just get 1 quarterback. But this is the last thing I'll say. Like, it is such an interesting battle because you have yes, they're 2 different skill sets, but one guy has like a lot of college experience and the other guy's got, I mean, he's been within the program. Like the dude's been under Chip Lindsey for a year, Connor Harrell being. He's already been under that offense a little bit, kind of knows some of those guys, and he already has a lot of the timing down with some of those guys, you know, versus Max Johnson, who again has shown more in that starting role. So I'm really just interested in seeing how it looks in the spring game. Like, and we're gonna obviously cover that and give y'all like, you know, what y'all need on that, because that's gonna be what everybody's gonna want to know, and that's what us in the press box, that's what we're gonna want to see.
I love how you frame that, Jeremiah. I think it's a great point. I mean, last year in the South Carolina game, there were a few packages for British Brooks in the Wildcat formation,
Yeah.
and that was taking the ball out of Drake
Yeah.
May's hands, who's going to be a top 3 pick next week in the NFL draft. So it feels almost inevitable that if Harrell is the backup, for example, you could see some packages with him to leverage that speed. I think that is a great point.
The one thing I would say real quick, not to cut you off, they kind of abandoned that Wildcat. So like it was like the first game it worked pretty well, then the second game it didn't really work, and they just kind of like went away from it. So also Connor, I mean, you know, British, I remember British being kind of a bigger guy as well. So, you know, but yeah, I see what you're saying for sure. Like they've done that. Like they've kind of taken the ball out of Drake's hands a little bit. Yeah, for sure. They definitely did that. Yeah.
And Timothy Phelps in the chat brings up a very good point. I'm not scared Johnson wins, Harrell transfers. That is an interesting dynamic here as well, because let's be honest, you know, just thinking through the chess pieces here, let's say Mack Brown comes out and he names Connor Harrell the starter tomorrow, whatever. He could do that. It's within his right. All of a sudden, Max Johnson might say, hey, you know what? I came to be a starter. I have a lot of SEC experience. I'm going to go into the transfer portal. Now, all of a sudden, UNC's QB depth chart is extremely thin. And that, I think, brings us to a great segue into the transfer portal and what the current state is there. I already referenced Tad Hudson entering the transfer portal. Evan, I'm going to ask you to give us a little bit of a rundown if you can. I know Adam's been writing the story on InsideCarolina.com, keeping up with the transfer portal news. But Evan, can you give us a recap of the transfer portal for UNC so far, and also some of your thoughts around what position groups UNC should be looking for in the spring transfer portal window?
Yeah, so far they've had 4 entries. Like you mentioned, Tad Hudson was announced a couple of days ago at the quarterback spot. Then you had 2 guys, I think both coming off their true freshman years, in DJ Geth and Aiden Duncanson. I think Duncanson appeared in 1 game, and I don't think Geth played a snap all year. And then you had Legend Cavazos enter the portal, and that was definitely the guy who played the most of that group. He's a guy that started a couple games, I'm pretty sure, for UNC, transferred in from Ohio State. And I saw a couple, just people on the outside wondering, why would Cavazos potentially enter? Thought maybe he'd be in a spot to maybe compete for even a starting role or just be in the rotation. And just from the open practices, it was pretty clear that Cavazos wasn't really even close to getting snaps, let alone start. They're pretty settled in with Huzzy, and obviously Marcus Allen isn't practicing, but you would assume that would be the other starting guy at the opposite end. And then the JUCO transfer, Tyron Stewart, is another guy that they really like and who's been playing a lot. And he looks pretty good too. He's very lanky and wiry. I made the comparison to Adam while we were watching him, and I don't think this is going to get good backlash from the chat. But if I'm just talking body type, he looked very Tony Grimes-esque and just very wiry kind of a build. I'm not saying he's going to be the same player as Tony Grimes. I don't know. But if we're talking body type, and if we're being honest, Tony Grimes had an NFL build at cornerback. I mean, that's why the kid was a 5-star coming out of high school. He looks good. And Stewart had a very similar wiry kind of build, who's definitely kind of coming into his own during the spring. And then you've got some other younger guys at the star spot, Trey Miller. They like Caleb Koss when he's able to come over from baseball. He's getting a lot of snaps there. Obviously, Dre Boykins working back from that knee injury. But it was interesting when Mack was talking about the portal with us yesterday. Obviously, defensive line has been something, they've been talking about back to the bowl game almost. And it's especially on the interior, it's something they haven't fulfilled. If I'm not mistaken, I don't think they've gotten a commitment from an interior defensive lineman from the transfer portal. So that's definitely a position that I think they're going to heavily target. Quarterback is now one. And I know people are going to laugh at the idea of looking for a 4th-string quarterback, but the reality is UNC's got 3 guys on scholarship. And, injuries happen in football. Max Johnson doesn't have the greatest injury history. Connor Harrell's a mobile guy that if he's going to be playing, he's going to take some shots. I mean, he got injured in the bowl game against West Virginia and was a totally different player. If you remember last year, Duke was on their 3rd-string quarterback at one point, a true freshman who had to come in and play against UNC. The year before, I think Georgia Tech went through 3 or 4 quarterbacks. Same with NC State. They were down to a quarterback that was on scout team to start the year. And right now, that 4th-string quarterback is a walk-on Mazzoni, who I think is also a true freshman. And I don't know if I was surprised or not by the Hudson portal entry. I think maybe the writing was on the wall in a way when you hear Merdinger as the pretty surefire 3rd-string guy from Mack in the spring. I mean, you're talking about a guy in Merdinger. He's not a big guy. He's only been on campus since January. And if he's already jumping over a guy in Tad Hudson, who just from the outside looks to part, I mean, he's a big guy, high 4-star recruit. That kind of is telling where maybe Hudson was at in his point with UNC. So quarterback is another spot they're going to look at. Adam asked the great question of if they're going to be looking for a punter in the portal, which I think is a valid discussion. Max said they're going to look for a guy who could maybe prefer walk-on. Because if I'm not mistaken, I think they've got one room for a scholarship guy at the punter spot, I would assume. I mean, I don't really think there's a need to have two scholarship punters. I don't know if McGinnis is on scholarship right now or not. I assume he is. And then they've got a freshman who's going to be coming in over the summer that Mack talked about at the punter spot, who I happened to look up. He's the number 7 rated punter in the country. So take that for what you want, everyone. And I will keep saying this. Punting is going to have to be looked at. Something's going to have to change either over the summer with McGinnis, or I don't know if they're going to have to change up the style of punt he does, or if this true freshman is going to come in. But if the punting that was on display for us in the limited time we've seen it is on display during the season, UNC's defense is going to be giving up 30-yard drive touchdowns. They won't be very far drives for the opposition. And it was interesting. Mack mentioned for the spring game, just due to depth and having a lot of guys out due to injuries, the only kicking part that is going to be on display are extra points and field goals, which I was a little disappointed about. I was hoping just to see if, maybe McGinnis is better when he's in front of an audience or something. I don't know. Maybe he's better when he's inside of a stadium. And then obviously Mack mentioned just a bunch of positions, cornerback. I think he mentioned offensive line, using just the whole idea of if someone enters who can make us better, we're going to make a call, try to go after them. But it'll be interesting to see if they even get anyone. I'm pretty sure last transfer portal they did not. And I think the year prior they might have gotten 1 or 2 players. I know Don wrote about it a little bit in his recent transfer portal scoop, which is really good, just laying out the positions UNC's looking for, some of the guys they've contacted or targeted. And he does mention the punter in there a little bit. So for anyone interested in that, go ahead and read that. But yeah, it's going to be an opportunity to get some players. Not necessarily, you're not going to get a guy who's going to start. You're not going to get just a stud defensive lineman or anything like that. But it's definitely an opportunity to build your depth and get some guys who could impact in games this year.
See, Evan, what you have to understand though is that it's hard to punt indoors. So that's why McGinnis has looked less than stellar. You get him outdoors, guy from Australia. He's gonna let it rip a little more than some of the 28-yard shanks that we've seen. But I was thinking I was gonna hop in here because I was thinking just about the quarterbacks, and we were talking about would we have an idea on a starter coming out of the spring game? I was reminded of just a few years ago. When Drake May and Jacoby Criswell were in their quarterback competition, I had someone who would know tell me that that something happened that spring that totally freaked them out, the coaching staff, I mean, that if, let's say, they went ahead and named Drake the starter when it looked like he was going to be the starter, they thought Criswell would get in the portal immediately and transfer. So that's why, if you remember, going up at the Monday prior to the FAMU game to open that season, Mack came in and gave went on forever, gave a preamble and said that Drake May would be the starting quarterback. I had heard again from someone who knew that they knew Drake May was going to be their starter very quickly. And I think that when they were sort of breaking down some of the practice stuff that spring, I guess it would have been spring of 2022, that there was some sort of a conversation with Jacoby Criswell where Phil Longo went and told Mack Brown, look, he's going to get out of here. And they were freaked out because if he gets in the portal, there goes your backup. So what all of this is to say that it's going to do Carolina no good for Mack to come up to the podium and say, everybody, Max Johnson's our starter. He's thrown 900 balls in the SEC, which, by the way, is not true. We looked it up. I put it in the spring stock watch the other day. He has thrown 784 passes as a college quarterback. I have no idea how Mack gravitated to 900. He's thrown 900 balls in the SEC. I don't know what. Yeah, rounding up, right? He rounded way up, 784. But it's going to do them no good. I'm talking like a college football coach now to say Max Johnson is our starter. Connor Harrell's our starter. I think if you name Max Johnson the starter, Connor gets in the portal probably, maybe. Max has been around so much. I don't know. Can he transfer again? He's already transferred twice. I guess he can't. This is it for Max Johnson. This is it. So, yeah, I don't know. I think we're gonna this is gonna continue in terms of what you hear in terms of coach speak. I think it's going to continue to be, a competition into August, into fall camp. But I was reminded of the Jacoby Criswell fears. Just hearing us talk about that, they knew that Drake was their guy at this time 2 years ago, but they sure weren't gonna let that cat out of the bag until they absolutely had to.
And if you want, Jacoby Criswell is available in the transfer portal. I believe he entered the portal. So there, full circle moment, perhaps. We are coming up on the 10 o'clock hour here on the East Coast. So we're going to do one final round of rapid fire questions. I'm going to pepper one question for each of our panelists. First one is for Jeremiah. This is from Timothy Phelps. Jeremiah, who is one freshman you are impressed with from the UNC football team?
Yeah, appreciate the question, Mr. Timothy Phelps. Jordan Shipp for sure. That dude was getting a lot of, because of, yes, the injuries, several not just first team reps, but a lot of targets. Like both quarterbacks really seem to trust that guy. Alex Taylor, I think, is right there with him too. He had a really impressive, like kind of contorting, like, contested catch. I can't remember who I think it was Zion Ferguson, who's another young guy. But certainly those two on offense, and then I would say Malcolm Ziegler, I think, can end up being a pretty good contributor defensively. But I would say those guys.
I like it. This is from WH1315, and this one is for Evan. What is their defensive line like, or as he wrote it so beautifully, what they D-line like? Evan, what are your thoughts there on UNC's defensive line?
Yeah, I kind of touched on it earlier. They've got a lot of talent on the defensive line. They've had a lot of talent there for a while. It's more so, it's time for some of these guys to show it. I mean, talking about Des Evans wanting, I don't know if first round is in the cards, but I definitely think Des Evans has a chance to be drafted. This is a year that he's going to have to show he can provide consistency, and he looks the part. I like Bo Atkinson a lot. I think he can be a good contributor. Obviously, everyone knows what K'Mon Rucker is going to be. And then on the interior, I think you've got Kevin Hester, Javari Ritzy, and Travis Shaw. I think that's a group that can be solid. I think if you can get one or two players to step up, that can be an overall group that is pretty solid. And then I just wanted to circle back to Jeremiah's point real quick. I know this is rapid fire, but everyone talks about Jordan Shipp's route running and how it's so beyond his years. And an interesting note on Jordan Shipp, I had the opportunity to be at Drake May's Pro Day. And Drake May, I assume, probably gets to pick who he wants out there running routes. So he had Nate McCollum out there running routes. He had Bo Corrales, who was back in town doing the Pro Day. He had two players who I think had graduated school a while ago, and Drake had been just training with in the Charlotte area and with his trainer. And then he had Jordan Shipp out there running routes at his Pro Day. I mean, you're talking about a true freshman who's been on campus for 4 months running routes for a guy who's going to be, a projected top 3, top 5 pick in front of all 32 NFL teams represented. That doesn't mean Jordan Shipp might not get time this year just because of how many experienced guys they have at the receiver room, but I definitely think he's a player who has a chance to break into that room. If not this year, definitely next year. And just that entire young receiver room is really talented.
Love that nugget there from Evan. And then the final rapid fire question here. Love the YouTube name. Excellent name. Lovey's Fat Life asks, does our O-line hold up offensive tackles? Adam, any perspective on UNC's offensive line?
Yeah, I would also like to recognize Lovey's Fat Life for, well done, Lovey. And also I was scrolling back earlier. Our guy Jonathan Grant, he was taking me on a time machine trip back. He mentioned Chris Keldorf and Oscar Davenport. Those were my years. Those were my college years from Mack 1.0. Those were the days, dude. But yeah, hey, this is a very valid, relevant question, I think. They will tell you that, they certainly look the part. But this is the offensive line that's going to be replacing 4 starters. And the one starter coming back is Willie Lampkin. And you're going to have 2 guys at offensive tackle, at least right now, because the Georgia Tech transfer Leftwich is coming. They have 2 more guys who are coming after the spring semester. And the Leftwich dude from Georgia Tech is huge. But no one is as big as Howard Sampson and freaking Trey Green. I mean, I pulled up the roster here. We were talking 6'8", 340 on Trey Green, which he told us when we talked to him the other day. I said, how much do you weigh now? Because I was just curious. And he was like, upper 350s or lower 360s. So they're shorting Trey Green 20 pounds on the dang roster over here. 6'8", 360. Howard Sampson listed 6'8", 325. They are 2 monsters. I mean, it's amazing to look at Howard Sampson and think he actually looks somewhat smaller than Trey Green. They look the part. When you got those 2 guys standing beside freaking Willie Lampkin, I mean, Willie Lampkin is like 5'10". But this is the question. We have heard that there have been practices where the defense has completely dominated the offense. Mack said it himself. They would have one Thursday practice where the offense didn't get a first down. Now, again, it's the spring, and who knows? Matt could be embellishing that a little bit. But I think this is an essential question when you're not sure who the quarterback's going to be, and you would like to get Omarion Hampton loose as much as possible. I think it's going to be interesting to see how much room Omarion has to run this year compared to last year with the dudes you had at quarterback and the weapons you had in the passing game and at tight end. Does he have less room to run because people aren't as fearful of what your quarterback could do? I mean, we're going to find out. Obviously, we can talk about this from now until August 27th or whatever day it is. But yeah, I mean, this is a remade offensive line. I mean, you're going to have two tackles in Howard Sampson and Travion Green who have not started a college game. They have not started a college game. Howard Sampson did not start at North Texas. Matter of fact, I think he only played 4 games at North Texas. So we will see. I mean, from what you hear from the coaches is they're pleased with the offensive line, with the development that these guys are coming into their own. They're going to need it. And I think Randy Clements has proven himself to be a pretty competent offensive line coach. But when you sit back and think about it, sometimes Drake May was running for his life. You're going to see all these NFL draft highlights of Drake May here in the next week. And sometimes there were teams getting to him with 2 or 3 guys, defensive linemen, I mean. So of all the points and the places that you feel like are question marks, can they get another interior defensive lineman? Can the defense generate some sacks and pressures and more chaos and more takeaways? Who's the quarterback? I think correct me if I'm wrong. You guys are all young, low key. I think the offensive line is, this we're going to see, but it's not a bunch of 4th and 5th year starters there. We're going to see what happens. I do think Austin Blasky, the Georgia transfer, I think they like him at center. They like the leadership. This was a guy that people in the portal tried to recruit as a tackle because he's played tackle, guard, and center during his college career. He's even played tight end. And he told them adamantly, I don't want to be a tackle. I want to be a center. He thinks that that's where he can go to the next level at. So I think up the middle with Blasky and Lampkin, I think you have to like those two. I think there's a bunch of question marks on that offensive line. So anyway, all due respect to Lovey's Fat Life. Love them.
I know they're losing 4 starters on that line, but to me, you have every single type of piece that you could need to build a great new offensive line. You have your group of 5 transfers in Howard Sampson and Willie Lampkin. You have guys with experience like Adorno and Travion Green and Lampkin. You have your Power 5 transfers in Blasky and Jakaya Leftwich. Like if you have some former 5-star and 4-star recruits, Zach Rice and Eli Sutton. Like if you can't build a cohesive offensive line out of all the pieces that you have, that's a different discussion. Evan, we're going to you. One final offensive line point I think you had before we close out tonight.
Yeah, this is my stat of the day that I've been telling Adam and Jeremiah all offseason. So Blasky, Howard Sampson, Trey Green are 3 guys currently on the blue team that UNC is banking to either start or play a lot of snaps this season. Leftwich maybe could get into the mix at the tackle spot when he comes over the summer. But those 3 guys have 292 career snaps combined played. So like Adam was saying, it's not a lot of football. To put it in context, Diego Pounds had 783 snaps last season. So those 3 combined have about a quarter of what Pounds played in 1 year for UNC. So there's a lot of question marks on that line. Like you were saying, John, they've got talent and they've got the size and the guys who look good coming off the bus and at the airport. It's just a matter if they can get that cohesive unit together. And I would suggest everyone to stay tuned to Inside Carolina's coverage of the spring game. As we mentioned, it's not televised. So the only place you will be able, well, probably not the only place. There might be some other places. the best place to find all the videos that John and Jayla are going to be shooting. Me, Adam, and Jeremiah are going to be filling up notepads of stats, since there won't be live stats provided. It's going to be like, like a high school game where you're just jotting stuff down. Stay tuned to our coverage. We're going to have, I think, 8 or 9 people there covering it for Inside Carolina. We're rolling out deep for the spring game. It's a big spring game, even if it's not going to be on TV.
Absolutely. I love it. Evan, we are at 10:08 on the East Coast. UNC and NC State are tied in the 8th inning as well. It's an 8-8 ball game. So I'm sure everyone is going to go over and flip on that game. We appreciate you all listening, 129 people watching live with us here tonight. As Evan said, check out the spring game on Saturday for all of Inside Carolina's coverage from that game. For Evan, for Jeremiah, for Adam, I'm John. Thank you all for watching and have a good evening.